Welcome, everyone. I'm Sandy Boyd, CEO and co-founder of Seek Common Ground. Thank you for joining us today for today's Learning Community Talk, Practicing Democracy Together, the Open System Institute and the Seek Common Ground Leadership Collaboration Network. For those of you that are new to SCG Talks, welcome. Seek Common Ground believes that those most impacted by policy should be full partners in co-creating solutions that affect them. Through our networks and action accelerators, we support statewide and community organizations in bringing about the change that matters most to them. We hold talks that show the work of our partners and friends, including everybody on this screen today, in the hopes that the field can learn from other people's experiences. Just a little bit of business. Throughout the talk today, please feel free to submit questions for our panel using the question and answer function below. We'll get to those questions during the last 15 minutes of our presentation. And like all of our talks, you don't need to worry about taking notes. We're going to record today's session and it will be available on our YouTube channel. So now to today's talk. With Dr. Landon Mascareñaz and the Open Systems Institute, we launched the Leadership Collaboration Network in December of 2022. Our goal was to try a different approach to leadership development, one with a diverse group of leaders from different sectors who were committed to bringing more democratic practices to their work, whether that was in community or coalition building or just in their personal leadership practices. You can see us at two of our convenings, Phoenix and San Antonio. We tried to pick warm places to go. As you can see in Phoenix, it didn't work out quite that way. Anyway, always great to get together with people. We found that to be a really important part of our work and our practice. We at the Open Systems Institute and Seek Common Ground believe that one way to strengthen our fragile democracy is to practice it every day in our communities. That's such a great picture because you can see us practicing. During our time together, we read, we met online monthly and twice in person. Using Open System Institute's principles and practices and other Landon's guidance, we continuously practice democratic principles through simulation and reflection on how we incorporate them into our work. And you'll hear more about that. Today, you're going to hear from three members of the inaugural cohort of the Seek Common Ground Leadership Collaboration Network: Kit Anderson of CivicLex, Morgan Craven from IDRA, and Sanford Johnson from Teach Plus Mississippi. Links to their bios are in the chat. I'd also really like to acknowledge all of the participants from the first cohort too, including Kinkini Banjari, who serves on our board. Part of what made this leadership experience so special to all of us was this group of amazing open leaders. Today's talk will be moderated by my friend and a great friend of Seek Common Ground and our partner in this work, Landon Mascareñaz, co-founder of the Open Systems Institute. With that, I want to turn it over to Landon to tell everybody more about the Open Systems principles, his book, and the work of our leadership collaboration. Over to you, Landon.
Great. Thank you, Sandy. And I just want to really kick us off by saying I really appreciate you quite a bit, Sandy, for your vision and insight to want to bring this group of leaders together and to think differently about how that could be done. Because, you know, we have a lot of fellowship programs out there, a lot of leadership convenings, and from the beginning, you want to do something pretty different. And I just appreciate your willingness to do that. And I want to say thank you to all the Seek Common Ground team here. We got Tom, we got Claudia, we got Michael and Lydia in the group, and also tons of friends from across the Seek Common Ground network in the attendees and the panelists. It's so great to see everybody. So with that, really the big idea behind the Open System Institute was fundamentally, as we move into this really critical moment we're at in our society, can we redesign our public systems with those they serve, the communities, the families, the students that are around it, and that work is happening in so many places and all over the country. We are watching people engage in this idea of openness, co-creating and co-designing with folks in their broader community. And really, the question that we want to really begin with is the question of building open systems is a question of democracy building. Are we willing to pursue democracy in the way that we design and build out our public systems? So the Seek Common Ground community built out the Leadership Collaboration Network. They identified an incredible set of leaders and really thought about how it could be a multi-sector approach to practicing democracy across all of that. And so on the next slide, just kind of for an example, we think this is actually pretty important when we think about kind of codifying these lessons and giving leaders critical strategies to support them in openness. In our experience, my co-author and I's experience, and lots of folks in this room, there's a lot of people who really want to work with their community. There are people who want to do co-design and co-creation work, but are often scared or frustrated or worried about the implications of what it would mean to take it on. And so we wrote the book with a mission and a vision to provide those tools and resources, along with case studies of people doing this all over the country, whether you're in rural, suburban, or urban America, because we are in a moment of redesign for the future of our society. And how do we prepare and give leaders the equipment to be able to take on those challenges? And that's directly in the book. And we took those concepts and the key principles, which is on the next slide here, and really anchored the Leadership Collaboration Network in these 6 key principles. So over the course of the fellowship program of the Leadership Collaboration Network, the folks in the network got a chance to experience different components of each of these principles. We recorded videos for them. They got to do some pre-readings and reflect on key questions around their leadership. Are they actually holding space for other folks in their work? How are they thinking about their broader community as a more of a dynamic, interchanging effort? How are they designing spaces to break through closed systems? And then once they're there, make decisions together in a fundamentally different and radical way. And then once those pieces are together, how are they assembling abundance partnerships and expanding openness for more and more people to be at the table? And so over the course of the pre-work, over the course of the sessions, we went through each of these key principles and anchored it in a simulation. And I think this is like what we're probably going to be talking a lot about today. The idea of the simulation, very different than a traditional leadership sit and get. This idea of let's actually practice our work together. Let's see what it means to try to come to some sense of opportunity, agreement. How do we find that open moment where there's so many different political forces in our community coming together? And the scenario that we built with Town in Arizona, trying to work together to make something possible, really anchored in a lot of Seek Common Ground's work all over the country. So we will get more into that as we invite our other folks into the discussion. So let's do that. Let's bring in our 3 leaders that we've invited, and again, very grateful for the other folks who are with us in the attendees. Their voice and perspective really was powerful in this experience. So we got Sanford Johnson, Morgan Craven, and Kit Anderson. I'm going to ask each of them a question to kind of kick it off. And if you would love to just kind of introduce yourself in the context of answering the question, give us a little bit of flavor of who you are, that'd be really great. So let's start with you, Morgan. Morgan, tell us a little bit about what made the Leadership Collaboration Network different. And there are a lot of programs out there, a lot of experiences we get to go in leaders. Share a little bit about that difference for us.
Thanks. Hi, everybody. I'm so happy to be here. My name is Morgan Craven. I'm the National Director of Policy Advocacy and Community Engagement at IDRA. I am based in Texas, but we focus on educational equity issues across the South, particularly in Texas and Georgia. And so we do research and educator training, but I focus mainly on our policy advocacy and community engagement work. So a lot of what we were learning together through this experience was really, really applicable to what I was seeing and what we're trying to accomplish at IDRA. So as I was thinking about the differences between this and other programs, I think there are 2 that fall into, a structure bucket and a substance bucket. So in terms of structure, I think it was really cool to have both the online and in-person learning sessions and build that over time. And so we were talking about the same principles over time. We were setting specific goals for ourselves and our own personal leadership challenges, and thinking about how to apply what we were learning to what was really going on in our lives. And I don't find that very often, just that format and that emphasis over time and application to what we're specifically doing. The cohort was just fantastic, just thoughtfully assembled. I think that was everybody's favorite part, if I could take a guess, just that we got to be together and learn from each other. So in terms of structure of this particular network compared to others, I would say that that's a big difference. And everything was just super thoughtful. The lessons were delivered in different modes. We gave feedback that was obviously incorporated as we moved along. And so just, again, structurally, I thought that was really important and a huge difference. In terms of substance, I thought it was interesting that we were all coming from different spaces. So I focused on education issues, but other people were working on healthcare and increasing access to civic engagement spaces. But the learning sessions were really designed to emphasize universal principles that we could all practice applying within our specific context. So community building, recognizing open moments or windows of opportunity to support and authentically integrate community, incorporating principles of democracy and understanding what those are and why they're meaningful, both within our organizations and in our external work. And so I thought that was really different, right? Just the universal nature of what we were learning together and the opportunity to see those threads run through our work, no matter what we were doing. And so I think, yeah, that could be the key difference, just the emphasis on how to apply those principles to different parts of our lives, not just like substantively what we do, but like from a personal perspective, what we were learning was helpful. From an organizational perspective, what we were learning was helpful. And then how we think about the outside world and the role of our work in it was particularly helpful in terms of the substance of the learning sessions. And the last thing I'll say is what I thought was interesting was that I think all of us were kind of doing a lot of this in our work or wanted to figure out how to do it better in our work. But having the shared language and then focusing on developing that with some specificity throughout the program was, I think, really important for us to like see the value of what we were learning and be able to explore that together.
Wonderful. Thanks, Morgan. I just really appreciate the way you pulled apart those key learnings and differences. I mean, that was so much of the hope and dream, right? It's like, in education or healthcare or transportation or civic work, we often find ourselves so siloed away from each other. Yet we know that the most intractable problems facing our democracy are multi-sector, they're integrative, they're connected. And the fact that kind of that was a resonant component of it, that was a part of the design. And I'm like, really, I'm so glad that really kind of connected with you and with other folks in the program, because it's the only way we're going to move forward to practice democracy differently. So we'll come back to you in a minute, Morgan, with some additional reflections about how you brought it back to your work. But let's turn it over to Sanford. Sanford, tell us about yourself. And the thing that we really would love to hear from you is what was different in the simulation? Tell us about your role in the simulation, spill some tea about other people's role, some of the fun that we had together, and we'd just love to hear about your experience.
All right. Well, hello, everybody. My name is Sanford Johnson. I'm the Executive Director of Teach Plus Mississippi. I have the privilege of working with a group of amazing teachers from all across the state. We've got two main projects right now, which is our policy fellowship, where teachers spend a year learning about the policymaking process at the state level, creating policy goals and executing on those policy goals. We also have a Delta Change Agent Network, where we have teachers working at their school level, working with their colleagues and working with their principals to identify a problem of practice, creating a plan for addressing that, and then working with their teams to take action. During the simulation, I had the honor of serving the great citizens of Juneau, Arizona, as their two-term elected mayor. So I got an opportunity to see all different parts of the simulation. I think what I really enjoyed about it was the coalition building, the trust that had to be built. Like they're meeting with education leaders. Of course, Morgan was our superintendent of our wonderful school district in Juneau. I believe Kit was on the city council. So we had city council members, we had community advocates, we had people who were definitely in favor of what we were trying to work for, folks who were completely against what we were trying to work for. I think Sandy, was a part of a parents organization that was dead set against additional spending that was taking place in the community. So what I learned through the whole process is that coalition building is not something that happens in a vacuum. Like you're working to you're working to seek common ground with folks and try to find areas of common areas where you agree with one another, even when you disagree. Are there things that you can agree on? Are there compromises that are being made? But while all those conversations are happening, I thought it was interesting that there was somebody who represented the media and would often tweet out, this is what I saw, this is what I heard. And it reminded me of how the community can perceive what democracy looks like, because what you're doing is you're observing what's happening, you're interpreting what you've observed, and then you're sharing that information of what you interpreted. And like that information sort of shares with everybody, this is how our political system is working right now. So I thought those tweets were very interesting, because anything we did, I may have a meeting with the superintendent off to the side, or I may have a meeting with this group or that group, but folks are watching and folks are seeing how you operate. So are you doing the things that you said that you're going to do in public? So it just reminded me that everybody's watching, everybody's looking to see how open is this democracy that you're talking about.
I really appreciate that, Sanford. I just was thinking about one of the things that we really talked a lot about in the design work, and I'd be interested in if you have any quick reflections on this, is just how odd it is that, and I think this probably will connect to some of Kit's reflections too, if I had to guess, but that like leaders like yourself and Morgan and Kit and folks like, myself and my previous roles, we have to do high stakes, high wire work that is at the intersection of politics and policy and practice. And no one prepares us to practice that. We don't get at bats at coalition building or getting ready to do a press conference. And that was a part of the design. I don't know if you have any reflections on that.
So I come back to the second simulation, which was definitely challenging. And I think the one era, like looking back on my time as the mayor of Juneau, there was an opportunity where some additional
distinguished service.
Yes, distinguished service. Yeah, like they're naming the park after me. No, but what was interesting is that there was a new challenge that we had to face during that second coalition. There was a new group that came in. I think CivicLex was a group that came in. They had a lot of funding and they wanted to help direct what was going to happen in the community. And I think during that time, I approached that more as a nonprofit director and not a city leader. And what I mean by that is that I was so committed to this coalition that we built during the first time that I was protective of it. And who are you to just come in? Like, we've done all this work, we've done all this planning, like, don't try to change everything. Like, we've done all this work. I think a mayor would probably approach this as, here's a great opportunity. 20 years from now, nobody's going to remember the coalition, but they are going to remember if you got funding for a new park, if you got funding for a new center. So going back, I'm wondering if I would have been more open to say, hey, come on in here. And also thinking about the fact that no coalition stays exactly the same forever, that there are going to be new people that come in and out of coalitions. And as people are coming in, how are you welcoming them, onboarding them, and letting them know this is the work that's happening right here? And you can be a part of this team. It kind of goes along with what I've said to folks that come into the Delta sometimes, where you bring a jersey and not a cape. So new groups don't need to come in and try to save our community, but how do you become a part of the team? How do you recognize what contributions folks are already making, and how can you add your contribution to the work that's already happening? So if I could go back to that second simulation, I think we would have gotten the money, but I think we would have done it in a way that would have respected and kept the work of the coalition. But I would love to hear what Kit and Morgan thought about that.
Well, that's a great segue. So, Kit, let's go deeper into that question. Tell us, in your perspective, what are the benefits of this kind of leadership development? We've heard a little bit from both Morgan and Sanford about the multi-sector, the common principles, the practice, the simulation. What did that mean to you, and the benefits that you felt and that you kind of saw your other participants experience?
Yeah. Well, hi, everyone. I'm Kit Anderson. I'm Director of Operations for CivicLex. We're a nonprofit in Lexington, Kentucky, Central Kentucky, focused on increasing civic engagement and democratic participation. But I'm glad I got this question of like, what were the benefits for this leadership development? Because to me, there were just, I mean, tons. And I do want to say as a disclaimer, Landon, I think it's a good point that there's a lot of leadership development activities out there in the field and that some people have done a lot of them. That is not the case for me. This was the very first time I ever was in any sort of leadership development. This was really the first time people were even calling me a leader. Like that was, that was a big deal for me, and I think made a big impact. But if I had to sum up the benefits, not to give a little another little roll credits moment here, but I think essentially this cohort created an open moment for all of us. Like it did what the open moment does, which is aligning kind of different frames and references and places to the point where us, the leaders, and I think us also the staff and Seek Common Ground and you, Landon, were in a place, we were in a mindset, we had the right content, we had the right background to really engage in new ways of thinking, new pieces of information, and like new processes where like there is so much information in the world, and there's so much information about how to do nonprofit work and how to do democratic practice. And like, I can read an article that I click on from Twitter about it any day. But like, what I think this did is it forced that open moment. Like it brought us together in physical space, which I think was so important. And really made it happen. And it challenged us too. Like the simulation, that was a challenge, but it also gave us the space to be challenged. And something that I think was really interesting for me in particular with this space that I think is pretty unique in terms of a benefit. I think by like most measures, I was like kind of at the bottom of the class, so to speak, in terms of being like newer in my career. Like I've really only worked for one organization in this space, but that actually in this space was an incredible benefit to me because I just felt like I had so much to learn. And I know that like in a lot of classrooms, being at the bottom can be really tough. And I think it's just like a testament to the facilitation that Sandy and Claudia and Landon provided. Just the growth I was able to experience over the term.
I appreciate, Kit, your vulnerability, and always appreciated how much you just dug into it. It was hard to believe it was your first kind of real leadership network or facilitation. That was like, I think until you told us that, I don't think anyone would have really guessed that.
It was my first like business trip, my first like work trip. That was very exciting. Like it was a lot of firsts.
But maybe not the first time being on city council. We'll put a pin in that. Or maybe the first time rather. So let's dive into like the implications for you all as open leaders. So one of the things we talk a lot about in the open system work is we have to really transform our kind of conception of the leader from this dominant authoritarian frame that says like, I have a vision, now you get to do it for me, to rather someone that holds space for a variety of community members to come together to build something they couldn't build on their own. We have to set bigger tables. We have to think about who's there and how do we adjust it. Sanford spoke to this a little bit in the coalition building questions. And so, we spent some time over the course of the 2 sessions talking about your great leadership challenge for your actual real professional day-to-day lives. And how these prepare you in different ways for that. And we asked you to constantly be reflecting on not only what you're doing in the moment in the simulation, but where are you seeing yourself in other people? Because the power of the simulation and the roles was to be able to say, hey, I like what Kit's doing as a city council person there, or what Morgan's doing as a superintendent. Like, I've done that. I've been that person. And we wanted to kind of create this opportunity for people to see themselves and their leadership dilemmas in a variety of different contexts and be able to see it from other sides. So let's ask the question, and let's start with you, Morgan. How are you integrating these principles and practices into your leadership and community building in your work, either in your job or your community at large?
Before I answer that question, I'll just note that I also like the second simulation was an interesting one. And so related to your question, I had a lot of thoughts about that simulation once we got through it. And as I have like backed up and like reflected on it, I think part of what I was working through was that it was hard for me to connect with characters that weren't like, I was like put in a situation where I had to think about an issue that I would have dealt with in my normal world from a very different perspective. And that was really challenging. And when other people came into the situation and treated me as the character that I was, and I knew that my real life thinking was not that person, it was just like there was so much going on. But what I took from that was that, like, in order to like sort of move forward under these democratic principles, it takes that hard work outside of a simulation to really like get to the point of like, you know, finding common ground, if that's the important and necessary thing to do, or learn how to speak to people in ways that they like hear and take in. And I knew this, but it was just really interesting to be challenged in that way and have to like go back and like re-examine how I think about those issues. So the personal leadership challenge that I identified at the start of our time together was really personal for me. And it was about like how I work with my team, how I think about like their skills and interests, making sure that I'm incorporating them in a really meaningful and democratic and authentic way into decisions that are made about our work, as I try to like do the same in my own work. So that's where I was trying to apply a lot of what we were learning. One of the first things that I remember us talking about when we were together the first time was like, you know, these concentric circles of self, site, and sector. So like thinking about how to apply these principles at different levels. So the leadership challenge that I identified for myself was very self. However, like I am now, you know, applying the principles for site. Like, so how does my organization operate differently? We run 2 statewide coalitions in Texas and Georgia, for example. And so being committed to democratic leadership is sort of critical for how those coalitions function, and not skipping over some of the things that are hard, or even going backwards to do the things that are hard in order to move forward in the way that we need to move forward is incredibly important. And a lot of what we learned, I'm applying in that way. And then, you know, outside of our coalition, the work that we do, the work of public education is itself like, you know, it's a fundamental aspect of our democracy, and protecting it is incredibly critical. So thinking about like how those principles play out in each of those levels is one way that I've been integrating this into my work, even though my original challenge that I identified was very personal to me in my leadership.
I really appreciate that, Morgan. And we talked a lot about that self-site sector frame for folks weren't there. Yeah, this idea of the change you're seeking for yourself, how that connects to the organization you're a part of, and then the broader sector or community that you're connected to. Just a quick follow-up on that, Morgan, for you. I mean, how have other people around you seen that in the context of your work? I mean, that sounds like some pretty profound shifts and approaches. How are folks around you seeing that? And, you know, just share a little bit about maybe some of that with us.
Yeah, one of the last things that we did together was an exercise about like kind of how we're going to focus like applying the principles. And I would say we've done a lot of meeting internally to sort of lay out what our plans moving forward, sort of a medium and long-term planning, particularly for how our coalitions function. And it's led us to realize that we kind of need some internal structuring for our coalitions to make sure that they are operating the way that we want to see them operate. So it has literally been me like saying we're setting aside time to talk about this specific thing, and identifying the people on my team who need to help lead those conversations, because it's not always best like coming from me. And so like making sure that I'm opening up the process of talking about how to open up processes to other people. I think that's been one of the major ways that I like have concretely seen this play out.
That's awesome. It's like, again, we talk about that in that last principle is like, how do you lift up other people who can carry on the work of openness around you, because so that you don't carry that burden all yourself. I think it's so powerful, Morgan. Thank you for sharing that. It was also great to be in your hometown of San Antonio in the second one, and you showed us around, which was pretty cool. That was a real special aspect to this whole experience. I felt like we got to like actually see people's homes and connect to that. Sanford, let's go to you. How are you integrating some of these practices and principles into your own leadership and community building?
So right now we're trying to build a coalition here in the Delta, several different organizations that that do work here in the northwest corner of Mississippi, trying to figure out where are there opportunities for us to join forces, collaborate. One areas where we think that that work is really going to take off is around what we're calling post-secondary success, which is a combination of both mental health and college and career readiness. So there are a couple of different organizations we're trying to work together and trying to figure out how do we build teams within schools that can join forces, share ideas, work to meet the needs of students. A lot of this work is siloed, and a lot of the work that we've done around mental health, we realized that the relationships between counselors and social workers and teachers and administrators, like everybody sees that there's a problem and wants to address it, but how do we all work together? So that's something that we've been trying to do with our work, and that's something that we're going to try to continue to do. One of the things that I have tried to do with our new coalition is try to figure out what coalitions have you been in before where there have been problems and there have been challenges, and where did those challenges come from? And based on that experience, what do we need to know to help us make sure that our coalition is healthy and, you know, we're ready to move forward? Because I'm hoping this will be a coalition that will last for a while. And I've been a part of coalitions that haven't lasted because there were differences, like there were communication errors, there are areas where we weren't all on the same page in terms of what success really meant. And there were some differences because I disagree with you on A, I'm not going to work with you on B and C. So how do we get past that? So we're early, but I'm hoping we have a coalition that's going to last.
I love the idea of like, how do you help build a healthy coalition versus one that like is a zombie coalition that just like keeps going and going, and what is it even about anymore, or falls apart based on the different political tensions that are inside there. That's wonderful. Okay, Kit, what about you? Where are you integrating these principles and practice in your own leadership and community?
Yeah, I think a lot of places and on kind of a lot of levels, but one that really stuck out to me, especially after our second in-person convening, was like just the importance of like modeling whatever the structure of what you're doing is after like the substance of it. So like the way Landon and Sandy and Claudia, I wanted to say Landy there, facilitated the actual convenings where like there was an agenda, but like it changed and like the simulation changed drastically. And like Landon was vulnerable about like, here's something I wanted to try. Like, do we think it's working? Like that sort of thing. Because I mean, you're talking about open systems and like being open. Part of my role at CivicLex is evaluating our programs. And I realized that was like a missing piece of us evaluating our own work is like, how are people engaging with us? Like we're very focused on how people are engaging with public institutions, and we're working with public institutions to be more open to that. But I was like, okay, well, we need to like, walk the talk here. So like shifting our workshop strategy a little bit where like now there's always like an activity. There's a thing where like people are like giving back to us. They're not just sitting there. And then also like within the activity, something that you all did at the convenings that I thought was great was like staff, the C Common Ground staff were in the subgroups, right? It wasn't like you all were just like sitting there watching us. So like, what does it look like to put our staff in the build your own budget activity? Things like that, just kind of trying to like have harmony between, like the content of what you're doing and like the form of it, I think has been a really big one. In addition to just some like, dare I say, like sneaky tactical things I've been doing without like being like, well, this is an open system principle, but like cadencing, right? Like trying, if we do have a coalition or a big group project, like meeting once for 3 hours, once, or meeting every week for a month, as opposed to like, dripping it out. I think that was honestly brilliant. If that's all I got from this, I'm like pretty pleased. And things like that. I was like, that's a real light bulb moment for me. But yeah, it's just about like trying to increase like harmony and integration between like the concept of a practice and the day-to-day implementation, and really trying to weld those together.
It's a really powerful thought, Kit, to kind of think about. I love that idea of like harmonizing what we say we care about versus what we do, which is like, so there are so many tropes that we've been socialized into community building that actually are dissonant and not harmonic with how we want them to go. We want to build energy and community and momentum. And yet, for some reason, to your point, we do the drip effect. We have one meeting for an hour every month for all year long, and nothing ever happens. Versus actually saying, let's meet every week for a while and like really dig in and build community and create that momentum. And it's hard work, right? Like we talked about that at the end too. It's hard to, we think about back to Morgan's reframing of the self-site sector, the things I care about, the things that I prioritize, the things that I then get my team to prioritize, the things that then I show up in the sector with, and having that harmonic connection between all those pieces. It's harder because we have so many closed systems in our society, which is kind of going to get us to our question here in a second. But they're essential because then we're talking about modeling the change that we seek in the world. And if we don't model the change that we seek in the world, then we're actually undercutting our ability to open systems up and do the co-design work that we care about. We have a couple more preset questions for the panel, but we do have we have some questions that are coming in from the audience, so we thought we might start there and then close out with some of the questions we prep folks with. So this is, I think, a question that could be about a school district or an institution or an organization. What do you do when that institution, school district doesn't want to authentically engage the community? They just want the community to be silent and not ask questions, and they prefer a top-down approach. That's the kind of very typical closed system approach to engagement. We often try to also not even use the word engagement a lot in the open system work because we feel like it connotates this sort of experience. So how do you all think about it? And Kit's raising her hand, ready to go. How do you think about this? Because this is all over our society.
Yeah, okay. I'm sorry, I'm jumping in here, but I have kind of a hot take about this that I've developed kind of a little bit since we last convened. Which is that sometimes you wait. And I don't want to encourage inaction on all fronts for all things, but what we talked a lot about is open moments, right? Moments where the situation, the community, the institution is ready, and then using that as your window of opportunity. And the thing that's changed for me just a tiny bit since we last talked about this is in terms of how I think of openness, there's definitely an alignment aspect to it that Landon, has covered and, taught us. But I think it's also a measure of the energy present in a system or in a situation, just the raw, almost molecular energy. If you think of phases of matter, back to high school physics, a solid, a liquid, a gas is just how much energy is vibrating those molecules. And a gas has more energy than a solid. So sometimes you just have to wait for a situation to generate that, or maybe try to generate that energy yourself. What does it look like to turn the temperature up on that situation? And all of a sudden those molecules aren't so close together, and maybe you can navigate a path through. I hope my internet didn't glitch on that. I got a little.
No, it was great.
We totally heard all the words, and I love that example. Can I build on it? Because I totally agree. I'll give an example. I think anyone that works in policy, for example, particularly if you are in an environment I live in Texas, no one is agreeing on everything. If we are waiting for every single person to say, yes, we're all on the same page, we would never have anything. We would never build anything. And so I think that throughout the cohort, it wasn't that we were learning that, democratic principles mean that you wait for everybody to have the exact same opinion. It was you build with as many people and communities as you can, and if you are encountering resistance somewhere, you have authentically done the work to build that up, then maybe what the task at hand is to push against that, and you have the energy and the coalition to be able to do that. And I think your solid, liquid, gas example was so good, Kit. You have built up the energy in the way that you want to do it, and you strike at the right moment. Policy is all about waiting for windows and the right moment to do something. It's not waiting for everyone to agree with you. And so the example I would give is we have a community engagement model at IDRA that are called education cafes, where we work with community-based organizations to help them identify education-related challenges in their community and understand the path essentially to push back against it. And the ideal situation is that the school board or the campus administration would be on board with that, and we work together. But a lot of times that is not the case, particularly for the communities that we most care about, who have been like historically left out of those systems and continue to be left out of those systems. So the very first group that we worked with is a group of mostly immigrant women in the lower Rio Grande Valley in Texas. So a lot of them have emergent bilingual children, themselves may not speak English, may encounter some problems accessing school because they just don't see that as a welcoming place. And so waiting for the school district was not an option, or joining the traditional PTA was not an option. And so what they did was they, formed their own group. They got together members of their community. They decided what they wanted and how to articulate it. And they worked for years and years and years. And then finally that moment, they were ready for that moment of change. And, have achieved quite a bit, but, weren't waiting for the system, the traditional structure to get on board, because that's not always going to happen.
I love that, Morgan. And just before we go to Sanford here, one of the things we talk a lot about in the open system work is that we have to reject the kind of, it's either inside change or outside change. And that actually we have to really hold space for both of them. And we have to, I love the solid liquid gas metaphor. And I also love your example, Morgan, of sometimes we could spend all of our time waiting for the system to act. But sometimes we have to act from the outside to show and attract what's possible from the other direction. And that changes the political calculation of what's possible. And so it's a really powerful thing. And I think some of the examples we're hearing here. Sanford, what would you jump in with?
I was about to say, especially with this example, that's why I'm glad I get to work with teachers, because I think in a lot of ways, teachers get to serve as a bridge between district leadership and the community, because they're trusted. Great teachers are trusted by both groups. So there have been examples when you look at school funding, when you look at mental health, when you look at teacher pipeline issues, usually teachers are in a position where they can bring in the community. In fact, that's what we're doing right now with our policy fellows. Right now, they're in the process of doing research on whatever topic they're addressing. But part of that is talk to people in your community, find out what they think about the science of reading. What do they think about mental health? What do they think about the different issues that we're talking about? And by bringing them in, hopefully that would also encourage the leadership to say, look, here are coalitions that are being built at the school level. Maybe this is something that we can be a part of as well. So I love the ability of great teachers to serve as a bridge, not just with school leaders, but community members and also policymakers.
Right. And it's really interesting too, kind of back to the kind of self-site sector change, sometimes I think people go, oh, an open system, we have to get all the schools and all the district and all these pieces together. But man, one teacher starting to change those relationships, then showing it's possible, the power of that really has transformative democratic potential. And we don't have to kind of fall victim to this idea that big is always better. And in fact, we have to start oftentimes with that one teacher, that one cafe, that one discussion, that one moment, and waiting for the right moment to strike. It can really make a huge difference. Wonderful. Okay. Any other questions in the chat before we go back to some of our preset questions here? I don't think I see anything yet popping up, but folks, I see a lot of folks here. It'd be great. Oh, looks like we just got one. Claudia's going to throw it in. Am I missing it? I'm looking at the thing. There we go. Specific behaviors and/or practices you incorporate into your daily, weekly work to keep your learning and momentum going. Ooh, good question. Daily and weekly work. Anyone would like to share some thoughts on this?
So something that we are about to engage in, and I mentioned in one of my previous answers that all of us did this exercise at the very end of our time together about identifying I think it was green, yellow, red, if I remember correctly, about how but one that we're really focused on that I think is so important for all of this is just authentic storytelling and capturing the experiences of people who are willing to share and want to share those experiences. So I think what is about to become a regular practice for us is just being more intentional about understanding those experiences and setting up situations where we are seeking out the experiences, namely of students and families who are encountering some of the educational inequities that we are fighting against. We do that a lot through coalition. We do that through like educator training, but like finding those different opportunities to make sure that we are hearing all of those stories and responsibly opening up opportunities for people to share those stories, including with decision makers, is something that we are figuring out a structure for how to do it more intentionally and regularly.
I love that. Storytelling, amplifying stories of openness. We talk about this all the time because fundamentally, if we don't tell stories of what's possible and we aren't lifting up those examples, we're going to fall victim to a lot of the failure and crisis language that we get really sucked into. So I love the idea of like building storytelling into the work to lift up those stories. Any other like daily or weekly routines that you all are thinking of to kind of keep this work going?
Yeah, so I've been a part of this strategic planning process where we're trying to think about the work that we're going to be doing over the next 2 to 3 years here at Teach Plus Mississippi. And part of that has been to look at where are the points of progress that we've made, which is a complete change from the work that we typically do in Mississippi. We typically go into conversations thinking about what's broken that needs to be fixed. But in this case, we had to talk to policymakers and say, what are we doing right? Like, what are some things that we're doing well? So a lot of comments around the science of reading and the reading gains that we've had in our state. And the questions are around like what specifically changed, and then what were the drivers that led to that progress. So we learned a lot about the work that was happening through nonprofit organizations, foundations that were investing in Mississippi, the work that literacy coaches did, and some important policy decisions that were made from our legislature as well as our Department of Education. So all the different things that happened that led to progress, knowing that we haven't solved everything when it comes down to reading in Mississippi, but we've gotten a couple of first downs, to use a college football analogy there. And where we are in the process right now is trying to figure out how do we build on our success and how do we continue to improve in reading? And then is there anything that we've learned from that process, from that victory, that we can apply to other areas? Like what have we learned about reading gains that can apply to mental health or college and career readiness or the teacher pipeline? So doing that has caused us to have a lot of conversations with people. And now I'm having follow-up conversations with people. And I've also I've gone back to folks and I've asked, what is the goal when it comes down to education in Mississippi? Because I heard a lot of people saying, okay, we made this progress, but I don't want it to distract us from the goal. Well, what is the goal? And a lot of folks said, we want to make sure that every kid in Mississippi is reading professionally. We want to make sure that every kid is ready for whatever they want to do after high school. And that is a big change for Mississippi because for so long, we did not have an education system that was focused on every single kid. And now that we're trying to do, we're having to rebuild a system here. So I'm going to keep those conversations going.
I love that, and thank you, Ingrid, for this question. What you just said, Sanford, makes me think about something that we talked, a lot about, and sometimes people have a real deep struggle with, is that there is so much crisis and talk and deficit language in our education system and about our democracy. And we know there are real problems, but fundamentally the work of democracy building is believing it can get better. It's believing that we can work together to solve it. Because if we can't work together to solve it, then what are we doing? And what I hear you talking about, and honestly, this was very inspiring when we were together in San Antonio. I just dropped in the New York Times article. I think you're quoted in it talking about this work. I think you said, Sanford, that your mom put it up on the fridge, which I think is really great. I mean, honestly, that's pretty special.
It is there. It is there.
Yeah, I love it. Is that, I think I mentioned to you at some point that when you brought this up when we were in San Antonio, like we've had the situation in Colorado where we've had enormous graduation rate increases in our Latino community. And like essentially our Latino graduation rates doubled in the last 10 years, which is a historic achievement. But no one knows about it. No one talks about it. No one's doing real learning or discussion around what were the key policy moves to get us there. And so it's really says something about the way that we construct systems and the way that we think about progress. If we can't celebrate it and tell our communities we're making progress, then we're actually going to undermine the very effort we're pursuing.
we can do big things because we've done big things. That's what I want folks to get from it.
I love it. Anything on this for you, Kit?
Yeah, definitely. And I do, Sanford, I like how it was a college football reference, not just a football reference. It's like, is there something on your mind? Maybe, I don't know. But, only first downs in college football. Yeah, I think that one practice that I have tried to implement is like, we spend a lot of time talking about time, like talking about how at the end of the day, the greatest resource is time and kind of like your energy that comes with it. And like me trying to reflect on like how I'm allocating my time and energy, and specifically with CivicLex's programs, trying to shift what the time I'm spending on the beginning of something and increase my attention on that, and then kind of relinquish a little bit the middle bits, like kind of the messy bits. Like I said, I didn't necessarily identify as a leader before this convening, but I did identify as like a control freak, and like I'm big into implementation, and I think implementation is really important. But a lot of what we learned about like the original sin of partnership and like the idea of like practicing democracy is like, okay, you have your idea at the beginning, and then like you have to give it a little breathing room in the middle to like implement it according to like how different people on my team implement it, according to how the community receives it, like letting that evolve a little bit and just holding strong to that one kind of founding idea, and then letting a little bit of the other stuff go has been like a shift in focus that I'm trying to do, both in the evaluation of roles of my job and in the operational stuff of like, okay, what is really important for me to like be hard on, and like what isn't, and like how can I like separate those two groups has been a practice that I'm attempting to implement with some success, some first downs, if you will.
Well, we talked about this a lot at the convening too, about, we have to accept progress, not perfection, right? We have to get started, we have to try, we have to grow, and we understand that that's not always going to look great right out of the gate. And sometimes that's actually, in my experience, what stops most people from even trying open system work or inviting the community into problems. They get so obsessed about making it perfect that they perseverate and have so much anxiety about what it looks like that actually it stalls them from making the initial outreach and even just inviting people to the conversation. And we have to accept that people can grow alongside us at the same time we are growing too. And
if you want to be open and you want to engage new people, you have to do new practices. Like I have an idea in my head of how a CivicLex budget workshop should go. And if I want to take that to people who haven't had it yet, like I need to change that idea, and I need to be open to how they receive the information. And I think that that is something that's really key that I learned through this group. Right.
That open heart, open mind is critical. Back to that self-site sector, right? Like you have to be willing to have that openness in yourself. So let's close with our kind of final question here. How do you all are now leaving this experience in your current work? You're starting a new school year, a new year of work. We're kind of, in the September, everything's getting started. How are you thinking about the relationship between your work, your community, and democracy? And I'll share a little bit after I hear from our three panelists here, but would love just to kind of, we have a lot of conversations about this in the fellowship, but I haven't heard from you all in a few months. So I want to hear what are you all thinking about this work and democracy in Mississippi and Texas and Georgia and Kentucky?
Our big focus right now with our teachers is to give them more agency, but making sure that they're prepared to take advantage of that agency. So like in the past, if there was a meeting with a senator, I'm the one who sent the email like, hey, I got a group of teachers that would love to meet with you about this particular policy issue. And now just empowering them and making sure they feel comfortable. And some like have been able to roll with this from the very beginning, but just making sure everybody feels comfortable to say, I can reach out to that office, I can make the meeting, I can handle it on my own, we'll debrief afterwards, but you got this. And just making sure that everybody feels comfortable in order to engage in that kind of advocacy. If there's a town hall meeting, we want to make sure that we're there. So much of the policymaking in Mississippi happens behind closed doors and happens quietly, which is something because so many of our elected officials are very accessible, like they're in our communities, like these are meetings that we can all go to. So how do we make sure that we're always present, that we're engaging early, not waiting until the legislative session starts, but as soon as we get our fellows selected, like boom, you're already having connections with our elected officials at the local and state level. So getting them more involved and just giving them a real sense of this is how policy is made in our State Department of Education, in our legislature, and then here are the different opportunities you have to influence the decisions that they make.
I love that. Thanks, Sanford. Kit or Morgan, how are you thinking about this? We got a few minutes left.
I'll just quickly say, like, so in both Texas and Georgia, we are going into legislative periods, special ones and regular ones, where we are confronted with the same issue, which is like what we would frame as like a very fundamental attack on public education, which is like one of the most fundamental structures of our democracy, and places where we need to like teach democratic principles and prepare young people to engage in this world. And so I think it's interesting to sort of like think about that larger context and like the rhetoric on the other side around that, and sort of a dismissal of these very fundamental principles as fundamental, and to be on the side of like saying very openly that this is what we need to protect and this is why we need to protect it, and to like essentially craft campaigns around that messaging, and then to step back and make sure that like everything that we are doing is consistent with that larger message that we are trying to put out into the world, because like that doesn't always happen. There are some really powerful, I think, advocates who work on that issue who don't practice that in their organizations, who don't practice that in coalition. And so I think for us, it's like being really consistent in like emphasizing the how of our work. This is how we talk about it. Like, so there's like the what we do, like what we focus on, but the how of our work. So leaning on coalition partners, having a robust community engagement strategy where we're talking particularly to students and families of color, those with limited means, those from immigrant communities who have been left out of these spaces. You know, we also have a fellowship program, making sure, and it's specifically for people from those communities, so making sure that they know how to access spaces, and like constantly teaching like the how of the system, not just we want this thing to show up here for us one day. And so I think like that's the connection where like it's particularly stark right now, because everything we're saying to the outside world is about democracy and about openness and about inclusion and about the importance of these like fundamental systems. So like that reminds us to have a constant internal check and make sure you know, our work and the work that we're doing in the community is consistent with those principles that we're highlighting right now.
Thank you, Morgan. Okay, 30 seconds, Kit. Close us out. We'll turn.
No. I would say that one thing that I've been trying to change is to think of the people that I'm working with on a day-to-day basis, internally and externally, as leaders, and like not just think of them as like someone who reads our newsletter, someone who does public comments, someone who comes to a workshop, but think of them as like on their path, on their trajectory, like here's this one thing they've done, like what else can we guide them through, what else can we develop them to, you know, be a part of civic life, who can we introduce them to, what's like the next opportunity for them, and try to think a little more deeply about like the individual and like communal, like democratic trajectories of the people we're working with, as opposed to like a more diffuse, like here's this kind of across the board.
I love that. Don't ever take a chance to miss telling someone that they too can help build democracy and be a leader in that journey. Thanks everyone for the time. Turn it to Sandy to close us down.
Yeah, thanks to Landon and to the panelists. Like it's unbelievable to have you all together. And I just want to thank you again for being part of this experience with us. It was such a powerful experience, you guys, along with the rest of the cohort. Such an amazing group, and I appreciate so much your comments and your work. And I just loved so many of the ideas I heard today about just doing it and getting started. And it doesn't have to be it doesn't have to be the big thing. You start with the small stuff. So many great takeaways. For those of you that like feel like you heard a lot today and you missed it, missed some things, don't worry, you can go back. We will let you know when we have it posted on YouTube, and we will be in touch when that happens, and also future talks. So again, thank you so much to the panelists, to everybody that participated today. We really appreciate you being here, and thanks for your work.